All right, let's call to order Brainerd Safety and Public Works Committee, April 5th, 2021 at 6:15 p.m. Tonight's meeting, we have a 9-item agenda, the 3-week buildup. So first item on the agenda is consideration for returning to a proactive code enforcement.
Do like roll call for?
Do you need to do roll call?
We should, yeah, just because we have one. O'Day,
Here?
Pritchett,
Here.
Erickson.
Here.
All right. Item number 1, consideration for returning to proactive code enforcement. I believe this is David Chansky.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. So last spring, as part of the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the council directed staff to conduct code enforcement only when complaints were received. In June of 2020, council did grant staff permission to be proactive enforcement of landscaping and junk debris, as we were starting to have issues with very tall grass and garbage everywhere. But all other issues, specifically other property maintenance issues and such, were complaint driven only, and we've been operating under that mode ever since. However, with spring now fully upon us, I am requesting that council authorize staff to return to proactive enforcement of the city code. We've been getting a lot more calls, especially starting last month, since we kind of got an early onset of spring. As snow melts, the garbage doth appear. And so we're starting to get increased number of complaints. In one situation in early mid-March, we got a voicemail from a resident who's very upset with the overall disorder of her neighborhood. In her voicemail, she questioned why we had stopped driving around, because I don't see any vehicles driving around anymore. As part of her complaint, to respond to it, my staff did conduct a 4-block sweep around the resident's property and found 19 properties with just junk and debris or unlicensed unregistered vehicles. Again, we're being very conservative in that sweep. That did not include any property maintenance violations, other code enforcement violations, such again as landscaping or, we had an early snow last year, so a lot of places, I know in my yard, a lot of buried leaves that people weren't able to get up. Additionally, attached to the packet is an anonymous letter that was received I think it was last week or the week before. Again, detailing a number of variety of code issues. Additionally, no property maintenance enforcement. So again, these are things like siding, chip painting, roofs in disrepair. None of that enforcement has actually been done since fall of 2019, as we don't do those in the winter. Again, due to the fact that it's winter, we don't expect people to put on a new roof. And then COVID came along in the spring, so no property maintenance has been done since fall of 2019. And then again, during my presentation in February, I did let the council know that our desire would be to resume proactive code enforcement. So at this time, we are seeking authorization from council to return to full proactive enforcement of the code, and I'll take any questions that the committee has.
So was this originally, did you guys have a motion to retract from the regular code enforcement?
Yes,
Through the
when
council?
we originally, when COVID first hit, staff, we had a number of recommendations as part of the city's response, and that was one of the recommendations, and that's why I was coming back to you for an actual motion, as there was the motion back last March to go complaint driven only.
Gotcha. Okay.
I just, one kind of concern more than a question. I mean, I would think that both people calling in complaints and the people being complained about might be under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress with COVID. And I think we should go back to proactive, but I think we need to be, I don't want to say that, extra delicate or extra, just really make sure that we're doing what we can and let these people know we're not after the money, we're after getting things cleaned up and getting schedules and that sort of thing, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I think it goes back to kind of what we said after the sign incident happened, just being more helpful with them and working with them. And I think you've already talked about that and stressed that, so.
Yep, and then on an average basis, sometimes it does take, with our process, the initial is a violation notice, with a deadline to address it. If not, reinspection, then you get a citation. Sometimes it does take that citation to kind of get people's attention, but on an annual basis, we waive more citations that end up coming to council in October for certification.
Okay.
I have a motion if there's nothing else.
Yeah, anybody else have any discussion or? were you
Can't
ready
see
for-
Tad.
Yeah. Go ahead with your motion, we can always talk about it.
I'd like to move to authorize staff to return to full proactive enforcement of the city code.
Second.
Have a motion and a second, any more discussion? Hearing none, we will do a roll call vote.
Erickson,
Yes.
Pritchett,
Yes.
O'Day.
Yes. Item number 2 is a request to approve an event application for the Corpus Christi processional. Is this a Paul Sandy item? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an annual event that we typically approve in the spring of the year. This is the Catholic Church of St. Francis doing a processional from St. Francis Church to St. Andrews. So that's to take place on June 6, 2021. It takes about an hour and a half for them to walk between one church to the other. They utilize Juniper, South 8th, and Willow Street. They typically just have some light amplification of sound, and they it comes out of the back of a vehicle. The participants hand out flyers. We've had no issues with this event in the past. In fact, the police department does assist these folks with crossing the highway and other busy street crossings. Yeah, we've had no issues. Came back with no requested conditions on the permit, and so staff is just recommending approval of their event application as presented.
All right. This isn't a full street closure, this is just as they're moving, right?
Yeah, they basically, it's just like a moving parade, more or less, and they just, they move right along and go from one to the other, so.
Okay. Tad, you
Mr.
got
Chair,
anything?
I've got no questions. I'd be ready with a motion if,
Go for it.
I'll move to approve the attached event application under the conditions identified, including that they would coordinate with the police department about crossing those busy intersections, and to coordinate the police prior to the event.
And I'll second that.
Motion and a second, any more discussion? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote.
Erickson,
Yes.
Pritchett,
Yes.
O'Day.
Yes. Moving to item 3, request to approve event application downtown Brainerd Spring Fling. And, go ahead, Paul.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is another event application that was submitted by the Downtown Business Coalition. It's for a spring fling event to be held on May 7th and 8th from 12 p.m. to 7 p.m. on the 7th and 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on the 8th throughout downtown. So there's no street closures planned for this. However, they're asking to close off the Laurel Street parking lot for some live jazz music from CLC. Otherwise, it's just an event downtown that includes shopping, some VIP bags for purchase, store discounts, historic downtown walking tours, in-store events, et cetera, et cetera. The only conditions that when we sent this application around is that they will have to coordinate with BPU on temporary power needs if over 120 is needed. We have our street foreman, Sean Midda. He takes care of the traffic control for closing off the parking lot. That's in coordination with the police department, so the CSOs will go and place it out before the event on their behalf. And so that's really all there is. So we get the traffic control out, we get the power needs, and we close it off for them in the parking lot, and the CSOs do the best they can in notifying people downtown, and the event takes off, and we open it back up and remove the traffic control at the end of the event. So staff is recommending approval of the application with the conditions noted in the app, so.
This is the first time?
This is the
annual?
first one, yep,
Okay.
this is the first one we've approved.
And the Laurel Street lot, is that closed for the entirety of the 2 days?
We
Or is it-
would open it back up, so on the first day between the 7th and the the 8th, we would open it up overnight again and
Okay.
close it down the next
It looked
morning.
like there was only a jazz group playing for like 2 hours on Saturday, so I was just curious.
Yeah, and I don't know if they have other things planned for that lot, and we can coordinate
still
with
trying
that
to
to
fill it
them
up.
and see if they want that closed off for longer or what their
Right.
whole plan is within the parking lot there.
So
So
it
we don't.
might be, we're approving it to close it during both those days, but it might not be the
Yeah.
whole time. Okay,
Yep.
got it.
I have a motion if you're ready.
Go ahead.
Move to approve the attached application with consideration made to the coordination by the applicant with applicable departments as noted in the signed application.
And I second.
All right, any other discussion, Tad?
No, none for me, thanks.
All right.
Erickson,
Yes.
Pritchett,
Yes?
O'Day.
Yes. All right. Item number 4, request to approve improvement 1910 2020 Northeast Brainerd resurfacing project change order 1. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Chair. This is what we call kind of a cleanup change order after a project is all finished. We had a multitude of items last summer that we kind of conglomerate into one change order to kind of complete the project here. And so we finally received all the pricing from the contractors that were working. This was for our project up in Northeast Brainerd on numerous streets up there, N Street, P Street, O Street, there's a whole bunch. So you can see the write-up I provided in the packet. Most of it has to do with some water items. The first one being, I don't know how much you want me to get into all these, but the first one was that the water service serving the holiday station was found to be a 2-inch water service. And when we found that out, we had a different size water service in the plans, and so we had to do some changing around and provide temporary water to that service station while the line was being replaced. So we directed them to do so on that one. We had some 8-inch ductile iron pipe that it was found that it was a 6-inch ductile iron instead of an 8-inch, and so we had to switch that around and put a stick of 8-inch in instead of 6-inch, and so that's the second cost there, the $1,024.55. On O Street, we had some really leaky catch basins when we took the surfacing off, and we were doing a subcut down O Street. So when we subcut the street, we're cutting basically 2 feet of material out of the street, unsuitable soil. When we did that, we found some catch basins that were really leaky, so we went and we put concrete collars around all those so we wouldn't get sinkholes in the future around those catch basins. That was for $1,428.19. And then on 10th Avenue Northeast, the contractor, when he was digging in the water main, accidentally cut a 4-inch sump pump drain line that was not located. We do allow sump pumps to be connected to the storm sewer. However, a lot of times we don't know where they're at. They were approved a long time ago and there's no record of them. And since the contractor didn't know what was there, they did replace that at our direction. So that is for the $2,130.12. By the specifications, the contractor or the prime contractor is allowed a 10% markup for the subcontractor's change order costs. And so the total change order cost as presented being $11,582.38. As you can see in the agenda request, even with this change order, we're anticipated to be right at or a little bit below what was approved in the bid costs. So some items underran on the project, and we have a change order that brings us right back up to what was approved in the final contract. So staff is recommending approval of that change order as presented to Knife River.
This is my first time seeing a change order. Is this just anything that was like unforeseen or something that goes wrong during a big project like this? You try to put them all on one order if you can.
Yeah, I mean, if it's small items like this that we know that there's an agreement out in the field between the engineer and the contractor that, hey,
Yep.
we saw this, get it done. It's one of those things that we can't really avoid. We have to
Right.
get it done. Then we do it this way. But if it's something that's like a huge change to a project, you're changing, street width, or you're changing section or something like that, where it was something that's going to be a large dollar amount and the council should have some formal action on before we actually do it, and it's not really a time constrained item, then we'll usually bring it back before we actually perform the work. So,
And these were all done during the project last summer.
yep, so this is the 2020 change order. It's more of just a cleanup before we can close the project out.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, the only question I had was about the 10th Avenue and why the city would be responsible for paying that when the subcontractor cut the line. However, in Paul's explanation, he sufficiently answered that we allow that on there, and we don't always know where those are located, and that the replacement was at our direction. So I'm comfortable with that, and he cleared that up. Other than that, I would be ready with the motion.
Yeah, go ahead, Ted.
All right, then I'd move to approve change order number 1 for improvement 1910 in the total amount of $11,582.38.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Hearing none. Move to a vote.
Erickson,
Yes.
Pritchett,
Yes.
O'Day.
Yes. All right. Moving forward, that was 4, correct?
Yes.
All right. Item number 5, request to award improvement 21-01 and 21-05, 2021 parking lot and street seal coat projects.
All right.
This would be Paul Sandy again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, again. So we opened bids for our annual seal coating project on March 12th. We got 3 bids in total from the contractors seen listed, those being what we call Aztec, Asphalt Surface Technologies Corporation, Asphalt Preservation Company, and Allied Blacktop. The first 2 we've worked with quite often. The last one we've never worked with here, but you can see their contract prices listed there. Asphalt Surface Technologies being the low bid. That represents about 6.2% under what we were estimating. As part of the budgeting process, we budget $150,000 for seal coating on streets. We did have a few parking lots that we included in the capital improvement budget this year for seal coating, those being the parking lots at the police station, the fire station, and the northeast fire. And so we had a little bit of extra money in there for crack sealing and seal coating. So that taken into account, we had about $163,000 budget. With that, with the parking lot seal coating, we included a little bit of crack sealing too, but we're anticipating that to be a couple of grand. So we're still going to be well under that $13,000 number we have budgeted. And so staff is recommending award of the contract for improvements 21-01 and 21-05 to Asphalt Surface Technologies Corporation, aka Aztec, and the total bid amount of $153,357.01, and authorizing the signatures on the contract documents.
Okay. Nice estimate, Paul. So where's the extra money go?
Back into the construction fund forever.
All
To be spent on something else.
Yeah, like side, or like crosswalks or something like that.
Yeah. I have a motion, if there's no other questions.
Go ahead with the motion.
All right, I move to recommend awarding improvements 21-01 and 21-05 to Asphalt Surface Technologies Corporation in the total bid amount of $153,357.01, and authorize proper signatures on the contract documents.
And I second.
Motion and a second. Any more discussion? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote.
Erickson,
Yes.
Pritchett,
Yes.
O'Day.
Yes. Item number 6. We have a request to approve change to transit operating policy. And Paul Sandy, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we had a meeting of the Transit Advisory Committee on March 11th. We reviewed some policy language regarding mobility aids. So this all has to do with Title II of the American with Disabilities Act. It's basically clarifying and refining the rules and the policy to match that of what we're calling new standards. The old policy had a bunch of measurements, 30 inches in width. So a mobility aid is anything that assists someone with a disability and mobility. It can be a cane, it can be a wheelchair, it can be an electric scooter. It can be anything that could possibly aid someone with a disability. There was a bunch of, nomenclature on the operating policy of where it says it could not exceed 30 inches and a length of 48, and it couldn't be over 600 pounds, and that our transit buses may be able to accommodate them if it exceeds the standards. Really is what this policy does. It basically leaves it up to so our buses have, different size lifts and things in them, and it really just allows the driver to use his discretion. So if the chairlift cannot handle a mobility device, it's basically saying that you can't. So it's getting rid of all the measurements, because these things come in all different shapes, sizes, weights, whatever they are, and it's really the chairlift that's the point of which you're lifting these people into a bus. That is the one thing that could limit them from using the transit system. And so it's really getting rid of all the measurements and everything. So you can see the difference between the two. They're basically not a lot of difference. It just says, unless the mobility aid or device cannot be operated in accordance with legitimate safety requirements. So basically it's saying that if we can't safely lift it into the bus, we can't take it. So that's kind of the refinement of the policy to make it more about the chairlift and not about the size of the scooter or the unit. And it's calling a mobility aid anything. It could be a cane, it could be so it's really tightening up the policy to make it more about the chairlift than anything, instead of specified measurements.
And the drivers don't have to carry a weight scale anymore?
Right,
or
right. It's all about
tape
the
measure?
chairlift and what can fit on there and what it can lift, so.
Makes sense to me.
Mr. Chair, I'll move
Go
to
ahead, Ted.
approve the policy as presented.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Hearing none?
Mr. Chair,
Oh, yes. Go ahead,
yeah,
Ted.
I'll just say, I think the language streamlines this a lot. It makes it simpler. Basically, as Paul described, if the lift can't lift it, it ain't getting in. And, instead of giving the measurements, this streamlines it to what the lift can, to the lift's capacity, essentially, and the size of the vehicle.
I just have a question for Tad and Paul, because you guys were at these meetings, I think. Was this did this become an issue at some point, or is it just because it was not fitting with this state law?
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chair, it's
Yeah.
basically, there's continual refinements to our transit operating policy,
Yeah.
dependent on changes at the state and federal level. So ADA is all a federal law, and so anytime there's like a change in a definition, for example, mobility aid, change from, it could, before it was just strictly a wheelchair, that was considered the mobility aid for everyone, and now it's anything from a cane to a electric scooter. So
Yeah.
it's really, as changes and definitions come around, we have to change our policy with our third-party contractor to fit that accordingly. So these things come up every once in a while.
Got it. Any more discussion?
If not, I have a motion.
I think we already motioned,
Oh,
didn't we?
did we do this already? Oh, yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, I'm looking at the next one.
Yep,
One ahead of
okay.
us.
You got another
I was
motion?
ready.
All right. We'll move to a roll call vote.
Erickson,
Yes.
Pritchett,
Yes.
O'Day.
Yes. All right, and item number 7, request to discuss Evergreen Boat Landing road condition. And Paul, you can take us through this one if you want.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So during the spring season, the last couple years, the Evergreen boat landing access that comes off of Evergreen Avenue between North and Northeast Brainerd has become near impassable during the spring thaw. So as you all kind of know, this road goes through the floodplain down to the city-owned boat access from Evergreen Avenue to the boat access. Our city street department and parks do maintain this on a regular basis, so we, in the summertime, when it dries out, we'll go out there and grade it and put gravel in the spots that need it. But typically in the spring, it becomes quite a mess and almost near impassable to get through with a vehicle. And then when vehicles do travel down the road, we get worse and worse ruts and things, and people use it more as a mud track than an actual roadway to get to the boat landing. It's not a public street. It wasn't a street that was open to the public for use. It's simply an access to our boat landing. So I did confirm with the city attorney that there wouldn't be any trouble in what we're requesting here tonight. because since it has never formally been opened as a street, we have full jurisdiction to do what we want with it. What staff would like to discuss with you all is the possibility of installing a gate that could be closed for a couple of months out of the year while the road dries out. This would prevent us from spending, a couple $1,000s a year and putting gravel in there, grading it, grading the ruts out, doing that kind of stuff. In the springtime, it does happen to get into a dumping site too, because if it's site distance from the roadway, people drive back there. We're picking up mattresses and things like that people get rid of in the springtime. So I think this could be a double benefit to the city to have a gate here. Not only would it prevent us from spending money in that respect, but it would also, talking with Mike at the police department, they've spent quite a bit of time back here, driving back there and kicking people out that might not be doing something we want them to do. So really, we're just asking for you guys to take a look at this. We do have gates already for it. We could install. We took a couple gates down from another location here in the past couple of years. We would leave it open to foot traffic, so we would tuck the gate up a couple feet away from a tree or something so that people could walk back through there if they wanted to hike their canoe back in when the river becomes unfrozen, or their canoe, they could still do so, just limiting the vehicle access during that time so as to not tear up the road, and giving us some time to let it dry out and so we can maintain it properly and get it in good shape after the spring thaw. So that's what we're asking here tonight, is that you just allow us to put a gate up for use a month and a half, 2 months out of the year when the frost is coming out.
Question, would ATVs still be able to get back there with that gate?
I wouldn't suspect so. They could drive around it still, you know. There's trees along both sides. I don't have a good picture of it, but
Is there a way to set the gate so they wouldn't be able to get the ATVs back there?
no, because when you get outside, so there's a couple of trees on each side of the roadway right when you come in, and we anticipate putting the gate, a couple feet away from each tree so that the ATVs couldn't get through there, but they could always drive around through the trees and come in from the side.
There's a whole trail system that comes, you could get back down in there from
Yep.
Bluff Avenue or
From a lot of different spots,
Yeah.
so.
Okay, so we still might be getting some damage on that road then.
Yeah, yep, there certainly could be.
If you go back there though, because when Paul brought this up, I did go down there just to see, and I had my lunch down there. It took me half an hour to drive down to the end of it because it's so bad right now. And the ruts that you see,
Oh, so those are your ruts?
yeah.
Okay.
But the ruts that you see are definitely from regular vehicles,
Okay.
trucks. I didn't really notice a whole lot of four-wheeler damage, but I mean it's something that we could start with the gate, I guess, and see where it goes from there. Has this ever been spoken about as far as laying asphalt down or just making it more
Or do they put class 5 in there? Cause that looks pretty muddy.
Yeah, we dumped probably $3,000 to $4,000 worth of class 5 in there last year, and that disappears pretty quickly. So you can see it gets mushed into the dirt
Right, I was
underneath
gonna say,
it.
if it's just a soft bed.
And it's gone.
It's just gonna keep going, yeah.
The point about asphalting, it would need we would need to raise the grade all the way through there in order to get it to drain properly.
Get a decent
And then
grade on it.
we'd have to put in quite a few culverts because it would be blocking the drainage of the floodplain quite a bit. And so I could foresee some environmental issues that come up with that. Really, we keep dumping the gravel in there and it disappears. And so that's kind of the issue we're dealing with right now, so.
Well, if you can keep the
Mr.
rutting out
Chair,
in the
this-
spring, that'll help.
Go ahead, Ted.
Chair, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Well, two questions. One, why is my screen changing colors? That looks kind of funny, but I don't know if you're seeing that on this at your
Oh,
end.
Blue
but-
Man Group.
My question, well, first a comment too. I've been back there in the springtime, and the ruts are nasty, and wasn't sure if I was gonna make it out of there with my vehicle as well. I like this idea. I think it solves kind of both those problems. As Paul said, kind of a twofer. In addition to that, I was wondering, is there any way we could put up like a temporary sign, kind of just explaining what, this is just a seasonal thing. Pedestrians are still welcome to make their way down there, because I would hate to have it deter
Yeah.
pedestrians.
Well, I think that
Is if we're able to communicate that would be my only comment to add.
the main concern would start once fishing opener becomes closer and closer. And by that time, mid-May, it should be dried up, I think. But yeah, I think it might be smart to get a sign out there that explains this is only until it's dry, temporary close.
Just so you don't have someone walk in, at this time, see it, and then think they can't go back there at opener or something.
Right.
I think maybe put some parameters on that it has to be opened by fishing opener. You know, we're gonna have some late springs and people, I think that's when the phone calls would really start coming in.
Yeah.
Is if we, it really depends on the condition of the road. I agree, but I'm hoping that by the middle of May every year that we should have it open for the fishermen that do have motorized
Well, even with a
boats.
sign, something like closed to vehicular traffic until road condition improves.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that would be my main concern with this is just making sure that we're being or communicating with the public about what the need is. I think people will understand that this is in an effort to allow access as opposed to restrict it.
Yep.
Right now the restriction that is happening is people can't get back there. We have to find out a way to make it work so that people can get back there when they need to or when they finally want to. So restricting it for a short period of time every spring, there are road restrictions all over this area. And I think people are used to that. We just need to make sure that we're communicating that appropriately.
And I'm sure there have been vehicles stuck down there that, if they wanted to, they can blame us.
Yep, it looks that way, just
yeah.
from the ruts that are back there. I think there's been some cars that may have gotten stuck.
Okay. Anybody have anything else they'd like to add of relevance?
I think I'm ready for a motion.
Go ahead.
All right. I move that staff install a gate across the axis of Evergreen Landing for the use during the spring season. And thought to prevent damage to the roadway surface and reduce maintenance time and effort to repair, and highly recommend that we do put some sort of signage up there explaining it.
All right.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote.
Erickson,
Yes.
Pritchett,
Yes.
O'Day.
Yes. Motion passes. Now we move on to item number 8, request to review and change improvement 19-18 Highway 25 trail construction year. And Paul, go ahead and explain this one.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So back in 2019, the city was awarded some federal funds for a trail along the south side of Highway 25 between 5th Avenue Northeast and 28th Street. So if you can picture that, our new trail on 28th Street was built in 2014 or 2015, I'm sorry, 2015, and it would go over to the McDonald's in Northeast Brainerd. So as part of that funding, it was due to come out in 2024. It's a 5-year lag time when we're awarded that through the Transportation Alternatives Program. The city's current plan, as it stood before this item, was to construct the trail in 2022 along with a MnDOT bridge replacement project. So MnDOT was planning on replacing that bridge over the railroad tracks in 2022. With COVID and things hitting MnDOT and them reevaluating their next 5 years of construction projects, the project that the bridge replacement was under did get pushed back 1 year, which kind of brought us to reconsider when we're doing this project. So we were planning to construct that in conjunction with that bridge replacement. However, in the near future, in 2025, we're going to be constructing Highway 210 between Baxter Drive and Pine Shores Road. There are some large intersection improvements that are most likely going to be taking effect during that 2025 construction of 210. And the Mill Avenue, Highway 25, and Highway 210 intersection is planned for some pretty big changes, depending on what MnDOT and what the community input would like to see at those locations, which we'll be seeing some more on that around the middle of May. And so what we've been talking about with MnDOT is if there are some large changes happening in 2025 to that whole intersection, that triangle layout with the slip ramp going off towards the Ascensus building, the mall and all that, a large portion of that trail might have to take a different path as part of the 2025 project. So what we don't want to end up doing is constructing the trail along the south side of Highway 25, and then everything kind of getting remanipulated in there, removing a brand new trail basically, and realigning it somewhere else. And so the thought has been that we include this trail construction. The bridge would still get replaced in 2023 on Highway 25. We wouldn't construct a trail yet until the 2025 project. As part of that, MnDOT would take our funding and they would cover our 20% match that we have with those federal funds and do the design work on our behalf. So that's kind of what we did on the South 6th Street sidewalk project from Joseph down to Buffalo Hills Lane. We did the same thing with MnDOT. Is we applied for federal funding from the city side. We got awarded the federal funding for that sidewalk. MnDOT said, we're going to be reconstructing that street in 2022. If you give us your federal funding, we'll cover your match and design the sidewalk for you and install it at our cost. So it actually is a benefit to the city because we're not having to expend funds to construct the federal trail or do any of the design work. And so that blue line was the original plan. However, if I'm going to step up here and kind of show you this whole area right here, basically up to 10th Avenue, they're planning a bunch of geometric changes in here. And so the bridge project limits are basically, you want to go back to that? The bridge project limits are going to go from about here to here, and then the 2025 project is going to go from about here to here. And so our whole trail could potentially be wiped out as part of the 2025 project. And so really, the point being is that the city won't have to expend funds if we wait till 2025. MnDOT will do the work for us on our behalf with our input on where we want the trail. And it's kind of a win-win because then we're not installing a trail in 2023 that could be removed in 2025.
Build it once, not twice.
So that's the proposal in front of you guys tonight.
That's my least favorite part of the trail anyway, is the blue part,
Yep.
the left half of it. So, yeah, my hopes are that they do something smart with it.
The thought process has been is that trail's probably going to cross somewhere at the Mill Avenue location.
Yeah, that would make way more
Or there could be
sense.
an opportunity to bring it down 10th too. So we're not quite sure what that looks like yet, and it'll come out more as we get through the
Yep.
design process.
So when the bridge goes in 23, there will be a small section of trail on each side still
Yep,
with that project.
ready to connect to. So it'll go from basically 10th Avenue up to 28th as part of the 2023 project. That's how far their limits will extend.
Okay.
And then we'll take it from there and use those federal funds to construct it to where it makes the most sense.
The only question I have outside of that is, does this affect the connection that we're making from Cuyuna to Buffalo Hills? The timeline doesn't affect that?
No, because that purple line that you see there, we're still planning on that next year.
Okay.
Question for Paul, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Tad.
So Paul, just want to make sure I understand, not only would we be saving the 20% match that we're currently responsible for, but also this would represent a savings in the engineering cost by essentially pushing the timeline back and blending this trail project with the 210 project.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is correct. Yep, that's all the benefits. The only downside I see is not having a trail connection for 2 extra years, and that's really the only downside. It worked out well with the South 6th Street project, with giving MnDOT our money and letting them design that and construct it. It took it off our plate, which helps, especially with federal funds, so.
Okay. Anybody else? Go ahead, you have a motion?
Ready for the motion.
Go ahead, Tad.
I would move to recommend moving the 2022 construction of the trail segment on Highway 25 from Fifth Avenue Northeast to 28th Street Southeast to 2025 to be constructed along with the MnDOT's Highway 210 reconstruction project. And further, that staff would work with MnDOT on the design of the trail, incorporating the plans, and then also ensuring that MnDOT will cover the 20% in local funds and local match, as well as the engineering costs that would come along with this particular funding source.
I second that.
Are we sure we don't want to add more words to this one?
It just makes sure that we're tying the motion to that funding piece, because it doesn't make sense for us if
Yeah.
it's not, if MnDOT's
Yeah.
not coming to the plate and helping us out, so.
I'm just glad it's typed out here, so. All right, any other discussion? Hearing none, let's go to a roll call vote.
Erickson,
Yes.
Pritchett,
Yes.
O'Day.
Yes. All right. And our final agenda item, request to revisit colored crosswalk painting plan. We've had some difficulties with that, so I'll let Mr. Sandy kind of explain where we're at with that.
All right, so since the last time we talked about this, we've had some in-depth, or I have, in-depth discussions with both MnDOT and FHWA related to the topic of colored crosswalks, and I have learned a lot about this and what other cities have done. So what I've attached in your packet is the latest guidance and interpretation of what we call the MUTCD. It's the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. And the MUTCD applies to all streets open to the public for use. So if a street is opened up, the MUTCD guidelines apply. I kind of explained what the purpose of the MUTCD is. It's to provide for uniform traffic control devices across the United States. If you look at the sections that deal with what we're talking about here tonight, it comes down to some interpretation and some gray areas, in my opinion. It covers elements of colored pavements and crosswalk design patterns, and essentially disallows most, if not all, colors of the spectrum for pavements. They refer to the colors that are allowed are like earth tones, reds, tans, grays, things that don't really pop like you would see on like some sort of artistic crosswalk. So when this article came out in the Brainerd Dispatch and things, I had already talked to the MnDOT traffic engineer from District 3 about this. He actually forwarded some emails to FHWA, and it kind of got all over the place. And then this FHWA guy finally called me, and he did verify that any type of blue coloring under a crosswalk would not follow the MUTCD guidance. And you can kind of see that in the guidance that I have attached. It specifically prohibits blue because of its use in handicap accessibility, ADA stalls. So any color, any contrast of blue, it specifically prohibits. So the staff member also did bring up the fact that the new MUTCD that is currently being written is out for public comment, which is basically an update to the old one. He wasn't sure how this was kind of referenced in the MUTCD. I did speak to him briefly about, pedestrian safety and if there's ever been studies done to show if, or trials about colored crosswalk pavements, if they've been done and if they've improved safety, because in a lot of circumstances, to me, what the MUTCD kind of goes after is contrary to what I think would make people pay attention. So when you have a crosswalk that looks the same, feels the same, drivers tend to get a little bit bored, and that was the word that he used and I used. And it's not necessarily what I believe works for pedestrian safety. So in that circumstance, and because of that reasoning, many cities have just frankly chosen to ignore that guidance in the MUTCD and say, we think that the data points differently, that having different colored crosswalks would actually improve pedestrian safety because it's different and it makes people pay attention. Like I kind of said, it could go multiple ways. My job as a staff member is to provide you with a recommendation that prevents the city from getting into any liability situations. And so what I'm showing here tonight is basically saying that based on the guidance of the MUTCD, we do not recommend pursuing the colored crosswalk in the downtown area. Like I said before, many cities, and you can do a simple Google search and find this out, many cities have just chosen to ignore that guidance and do it anyways. So, I mean, that's staff's recommendation here tonight, but I'm leaving it kind of up to you guys on how much, you know, how much you guys want to pursue this, so.
So Paul, if I remember right, there was a timeline, was it the early 90s, they actually encouraged this, right?
Yep.
And there's no data.
Yeah,
They
I
just
mean,
changed it.
yeah, I asked this FHWA guy that, you know, has there been studies done that show that having consistently colored crosswalks and not, you know, not necessarily even deviating from the crosswalk pattern, still having the white blocks, the white lines, but having a different colored background. Is there anything that shows that, you know, it helps improve pedestrian safety? And to be frank, you know, pedestrian fatalities have gone up since the early 2000s. And, you know, in my opinion, it's due to roadways being boring and drivers kind of not paying attention.
Right.
You know, crosswalk science is a little bit difficult to understand. We want to put crosswalks where pedestrians are the safest to cross. So, like, for example, you drive down South 6th Street, you don't see crosswalks painted at every intersection. You see crosswalks painted at intersections with traffic control devices like stoplights or other things. That's where we want people to cross because it's expected. We don't want people crossing at uncontrolled intersections or things like that because the pedestrian might not be expected to cross there. To me, you know, some of the guidance to me is outdated. From a staff perspective, I will be commenting on this because I think there's some disagreement even from the hierarchy at MnDOT, their bike and ped groups. They promote pushing the stuff to the limit of what these standards have been for many, many years and what they continue to be. And you know, if we can't prove that it's doing anything effectively, then what's the point in keeping the same standard or not? I mean, shouldn't we be trying different things or doing experiments with that to see if it improves pedestrian safety? So, you know, from my perspective, like I said, I have to follow the guidance that's put forward and try to, you know, be the person to say that this opens us up to some liability by doing it. But there are a lot of examples of cities that have done it. So it's a tough call from my chair, and that's why you guys are the elected ones. So.
And they didn't provide you had a conversation on the phone, they didn't provide you with any examples of a city being liable because they had colors on their crosswalks?
He said that they most likely will never come with a big stick and say we're going to take away your funding. I mean, that's no one's going to come knocking down our door. They provide us the information that's in the manual. It's guidance, and it's you know, I follow that based on my engineering principles. I don't have to agree with it necessarily all the time, but.
Just personally for me, I'm picturing myself driving up to this crosswalk with white blocks, water towers, whatever you want it to be, with the blue background and two stripes on the side. I'm gonna stop before that. You know, when you have just those white blocks, how many times has anybody in here just drove right up onto it and your front tires are right in the middle of it? So for me, as a point of safety for the pedestrian, this is a no-brainer. So, and it doesn't surprise me that, you know, the state or federal government is saying the opposite because it happens all the time.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Tad.
yeah, I got a comment and then a question for Paul. And I guess I largely agree with how you phrased that. I think that, you know, by doing something unique, it calls it out more and it separates that particular crosswalk from the humdrum regular, from the norm, and it's going to call that out even more. And then my question for Paul is, did you say blue was strictly prohibited? So regardless, we would have to rework the color scheme. Is that correct?
You know, you see this art all over the place, and there's blues, there's pinks, there's oranges, there's whatever color you can think of under the sun. So people have even disregarded that statement in there. I think, you know, staying away from the blue might be the best because it is a handicap accessibility issue, where it becomes, if it, you know, it's never going to look like a handicap or disabled person's spot, but having that blue there is probably one of the worst colors to use in my opinion, because it is that blue, even if it is a different shade. You know, we're looking at the city logo blue, not like Dave's shirt, something like, I don't know if there's a city logo in here, but you know what the city logo look, it's a very, very dark
Something a little,
navy
little
blue.
darker than a bright royal blue.
Yep,
So
it's a
if
dark
you-
navy.
If you get something specifically, they have a specific color for handicap spots, correct?
Yeah,
Or
I
is it
mean,
a
it's open,
range?
it's probably like Dave's shirt, yeah, I don't know what exactly it's called, but,
That's why Dave's wearing that shirt.
yep.
Okay.
The specific colors they say that are allowed are, and I kind of stated in here, it's earth tones, clay, reds, like you see on College Drive.
Okay.
So just two things from a driving instructor's standpoint. There are specific colors that have specific meanings when they're put up as road signs or painted. My question would it be cost prohibitive in both money and man hours if we were to take those water towers and put them before the car reached the crosswalk? Because you'd still have the same effect. You'd have an aesthetic effect. People would slow down and see that. It wouldn't look like an extra crosswalk.
I guess I've never thought of that. I would have to see how that applies. It wouldn't be considered there's the distinction between what is the traffic control device and what is not a traffic control device. And if you read through
Right.
the information I provided, they make that distinction very clear that the white is the traffic control device. The blocks or the lines is what they consider the traffic control device. I guess I've never looked into that outside of the crosswalk and outside of the pedestrian marked area.
I'd be curious, I think I'd be willing to spend a little bit more money and have that kind of little pop on our street and put it before. I think it would actually have some drivers pay more attention and, it would be unique.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah. Go ahead, Tad.
I appreciate the kind of the creative thinking to come up with a solution. My fear with that proposal would be that it give the illusion to a pedestrian that there's, two crosswalks or a widened crosswalk, and put a pedestrian maybe outside the actual crosswalk. Just the thought that popped into my head with that one.
I can see that on a regular street. I think if it were up to me, I would just continue on with the plan that we were gonna do. Maybe change the shading of the blue and continue to use the water towers wherever we want to use them, as long as they're not on a state aid or a state highway. But if we weren't gonna use those water towers for this, we could always use them in city parks and in our parking lots and in different areas where we have other crosswalks too. So I don't know if we're automatically getting a stencil for the tower, or if that's kind of
We
what
put
we're
it on
discussing
hold
right now.
until we were just gonna discuss it tonight.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
So I have all sorts of commentary on this, obviously. The issue at hand is an interesting one because, the idea of guidelines and the idea of guidelines coming from the federal government is interesting to me when it comes to state streets, when my idea of the federal government is that you should be dealing with larger issues. And I can understand the need for conformity and ease of use for drivers, but like Paul said, that there's no indication from data that says that these types of specifically the paint in the sidewalks or in the crosswalks has any type of deterrent for a driver versus pedestrians. And actually, it's quite the opposite. Do we know when this started? When was the shift to this uniformity? Do we know that?
It's been, that's kind of been the guideline when the MUTCD started. It's about uniformity, so signage,
What
crosswalks.
year?
I don't know when the MUTCD was actually created, but that was
90s,
the
before
point.
that?
I want to say it was, from what I read in this memo, I want to say it was sometime around the 2000.
Sure. So my point being that 2009 is when we started to see this increase in pedestrian deaths. It didn't coincide with these guidelines. It didn't seem to not coincide with these guidelines. It's just
Like the cell phones.
well, that's more than likely what it is. The paint on the ground is not the issue, and I appreciate the use of uniformity, and I can understand that on freeways and on highways, but we're talking about local streets where people should be driving slower to begin with. And the speed is typically the number one indicator of the type of injury that happens with a collision with a pedestrian. So fatalities happen when people are driving faster. There is data that shows that making drivers more uncomfortable or making them second guess their environment causes them to slow down. There's plenty of data that shows that, and we know that. The problem I have with this more than anything is they contradict themselves in when you read through this. Coming from somebody with, as I refer to it, a degree in pretty pictures and wonderful colors, the idea that a color on a spectrum is going to change the visibility could make sense if your goal is to make it visible, but then to come right back and say that earth tones are the preferred idea, well, then you're contradicting yourself, because the idea of the earth tone is to make it not appear visible. So when we're allowing earth tones, which we do on our own streets, College Drive, we have rust-colored crosswalks on College Drive with no white stripes at all. To say that those are somehow less safe than they would be on a street in Brainerd using a blue background and white stripes, to me, the whole thing just contradicts itself. It talks in circles, and there's really absolutely no data that proves anything other than the fact that we want people driving slower. So from my perspective with all of this, we've looked into the issue. We've done our due diligence with it, and this is an instance where the local government should be leading the conversation as to where these things go from a federal level. They're not going to make any of these changes. They're not going to start looking at these issues unless local governments start to step up and say, we'd like to do things differently.
I agree completely. So, I don't know if we're
Mr.
looking.
Chair,
Yeah, go ahead,
just
Ted.
as do I. I think we move forward as we had already planned.
I'm gonna agree. So I don't know if we're looking for a motion tonight.
I would say that the previous motion would suffice.
Would still
If
be
that's,
continued.
if there's no, if there's a consensus in the committee that there's no action required then.
Okay. We can always discuss it in the council meeting, but I think that's,
I think
I'd
we've
like
beat
to
a
keep
dead
it.
horse.
okay. All
I know-
right,
I know I have.
all right, with no action on item 9, we're just looking to adjourn, unless there's any more discussion.
I have plenty more discussion.
Do you wanna keep going?
We could talk, we could,
Yourself out now, not at the
from
council
what
meeting?
I've learned about this, we could talk for hours
You got 18 minutes.
on colored.
Yeah, you got time. Keep talking. Keep the camera rolling.
Bring up mosquito spraying again.
Here you go.
Kelly wants to talk about mosquitoes.
No,
Had a
There's
mosquito.
a few residents that wanted to dump motor oil in their stormwater ponds to keep the mosquitoes down. I said, I think that's the opposite of what we want for stormwater quality.
You can not worry about the recycling, motor oil recycling on
Yeah.
Washington, and take care of the mosquitoes. That's a twofer.
Yeah.
That was, yeah, that's what.
I didn't mean to derail you. I don't know if you actually adjourned your.
No, I literally thought you wanted to keep talking about it, but if you don't wanna keep talking about it, we can have a motion to adjourn from anyone.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any other discussion? None being heard. Go to roll call vote.
Erickson,
Yes.
Pritchett,
Yes.
O'Day.
Yes.
Mayor, you have the floor.
Oh, the whole thing's